Agreed. Let me share with you my hypothesis because
Okay.
it's not proven. I was looking at what the United States was doing. And by the way, this image over here is regarding the Algeria and Mali spat. The other source of a pipeline was going to be, if we put Turkey and Qatar, we had the Russia and Syria competing. We had the Israeli basin, basically the Levant basin. And then we had this option, which people were mighty quiet about. And that was the Trans-Saharan pipeline. I didn't hear a whisper about this until the coups started happening. And I initially thought that the coup was about the uranium. And I don't think so. I think it was possibly Russia and friends destabilizing because they wanted to keep control of the LNG market. And
The
when
LNG distribution market
did,
as well.
yeah, did,
You're 100% on the nose on this. I absolutely believe too that Russia realizes it's a petro nation. Its petrodollars are the most important part of its economy. The fact that it's been able to keep the Western infrastructure that we built running for the past 10 years without major failures, other than the occasional drone attacks by the Ukrainians to set it all on fire. You're 100% right. Russia cannot afford to have this come into fruition, into reality, because it will make them almost irrelevant.
yeah. And this pipeline was supposed to go through to Spain and southern Italy. And they had prepared LNG terminals, and there was Borrell, he's now moved on, but there was a commentary that he made in El País where he talked about Spain's capacity to deal with liquefying natural gas. And I chanced on that way back in 2022, and I thought it was very interesting. And I didn't know what he meant by Spain. And then I realized I came across the Trans-Sahara pipeline, which was being built at a pace. And then suddenly we had the spate of coups in the Sahel, and this totally disrupted the pipeline. I can't verify this, but apparently when they realized that the situation was not going to be stable, parts of the pipeline were then deliberately taken apart so that they couldn't be used. But this must have been a blow to Southern Europe, Spain and Italy, who had been looking forward to that. And if you want to look for who would the culprit be, I would cast my eyes towards Russia as having an interest in keeping that region unstable. And I would say Qatar and Turkey also have an interest in that.
And I think
Um,
because
and yes,
the part of the map, and I think this is, if we could actually zoom in on it, it would be awesome. But that northern part of Nigeria right now
yes,
is Bandit Kingdom. It is several jihadist groups are operating even across the border into Niger in that particular region as well. You're right. We have these blockers, and it's incredibly difficult to build something like a Trans-Saharan pipeline when you have groups that are just going to blow it up every time you make any progress. So you're right. There's two plays here. I think so. From the Islamic Jihad perspective, it's basically like anything that looks like the West, we're just going to blow it up. We're going to set it on fire. And we're going to export our view of Islam to the poor, who will continue to get poorer, which gives us a big supply of converts. But for Turkey and Qatar and Russia, it's more around the control aspect of this, and not so much about whether or not that it gets built or not. It's who gets to control the amount coming out of it. So if it's a trickle, so say, I don't know, something like 5 million barrels per day, when Russia is exporting 50 million barrels per day, everybody can probably live with that. But if, for instance, Russia right now can't export shit, Europe because of the sanctions and the fact that they invaded Ukraine, right? All of a sudden, you turn this on, and the relationship would never be reestablished with Russia, ever. You know what I mean? You would now
Yeah.
have this other source, viable, and I would say almost as easily, and I would say almost even easier to access than Russian crude from the far north of Siberia. And I'm just gonna be blunt. You don't have the level of environmental scrutiny in terms of like deeply problematic refining in Africa as you would in Europe, right? Economically, it would make sense for for Europe to look to the south for their oil, not this Middle East, but south into Africa, pay a fair market value, encourage development, curtail the spread of Islamic jihadism, especially in Nigeria. And Nigeria is such a sad country in a sense that there is so much opportunity in the south and a robust economy, but deep problems in the northern part of Nigeria that somehow the government is ineffective at or is just not interested in dealing with that issue or problem. Could speak to corruption, could speak to a lack of resources. For whatever reason, America doesn't seem too interested in the fate of Nigeria to the extent that they seem deeply interested in the fate of Somalia, which
Mm.
again does my head in when you look at Nigeria could potentially be one of the most prosperous countries in Africa.
I agree with you that there is a very scattered type of a play. The result, though, for Nigeria, Mali, Chad, Burkina Faso, all of these countries, France pulls out, the United States pulls out. Yay, we got rid of the colonialists. And then what happens?
Russian,
Jihad
Iranian,
goes right
and Chinese.
and with the jihadi violence, it's now uncontrollable. It is raging out of control. Russia sends in Wagner, rebranded as Africa Corps. They don't do that well in Africa. So I think it was in Mali where the Tuareg ambushed them, and we now have this hideous situation where it's Al Qaeda versus ISIS-like groups. All of these fragmented groups are fighting each other and everyone else. And so if it was Russia and, say, Middle Eastern influence, then they have really devastated this region for a long time to come, because once France pulled out, I don't think they're going to want to go back in there. I don't think anybody will want to go back in there in the current climate. And Russia cannot control it. Look at what Russia did to Syria. They basically just walked out on them. I see. We like moving to Libya kind of thing, and good luck. And they just disappeared. Very much what they did with Karabakh in Armenia. Azerbaijan came in, and the Russian soldiers just went, "Oh, okay, you're here. See ya, and good luck." And there was that. So Russia is not a good partner. It is not a friend in hard times. And I think South Africa has learned. No, they haven't learned. They are learning this the hard way, and they may have to learn it the harder way still. But certainly the mess on the east coast of Africa and on Nigeria and so on, absolutely catastrophic. Now, I don't know how much you know about this. It came as a surprise to me, I have to tell you, is the Declaration on Atlantic Cooperation.
Okay.
And it seems to me that this was, bear with me, Sun Tzu. when you are strong, appear to be weak. What apparently it looked like was happening was de-dollarization was continuing, BRICS was rising, the United States was becoming more and more irrelevant. They weren't aware of the danger to their economy because if the dollar goes, it's a very serious financial blow. The United States, isolationist or not, they need that type of control over the world financial markets. Which
I'm gonna talk just really briefly about that because Mark Carney, who will be the next Prime Minister of Canada, without any doubt, understood how to leverage the bonds, American debt, basically, and convinced a number of countries that hold American debt to start selling their bonds, thus indicating downward pressure on the value of the American dollar. That became untenable for Trump, and he pulled back on the tariffs. There are levers, there are strategic levers to, I would say, not compel American behavior. I don't think there's a strategic lever to do that, but curtail American behavior. There's two different things. There's making them stop what they're doing, and then there's making them do something you want them to do. I don't think that's possible, but I do think curtailing American unpredictability was exactly the message that Mark Carney managed to get because he was the former governor of the Bank of England. And he was largely responsible for making Brexit suck a lot less than it did in the United Kingdom once Brexit was decided that they were going to go. And this is why he has such huge horsepower in Canada and globally, is he can call up central bankers and say, I have a plan. And this plan includes you guys slowly dumping some of your American bonds to put downward pressure on the value of the American dollar. Now, if that became weaponized, for instance, and essentially a $35 trillion debt, which is, I think, what the debt of the United States is at this
I
point.
think it's 36 trillion now.
Yeah. If the way we get to a world war is because we put America into a place where they have no other choice. Okay. So I think that slowly cooling temperatures down by slowly reminding America of the debt that is owned by others and how that can affect the livelihoods of Americans at home. If you dumped it all now, that would be a global catastrophe. It would wipe out, certainly, it would be the ultimate Bernie Sanders weapon of getting rid of billionaires because there wouldn't really be any money anymore. Uh, but in a sense, what you're talking about is these dynamics have to be done by groups of countries, and forming alliances is the very basis of ensuring that war is kept as the remotest possibility. And I think what you're about to talk about in this slide is really around the fact that these alliances only work if the major players are at the table. Is that kind of what you're going to put forth?
No, I was going to go with something far more Machiavellian, and that
Okay.
has been that if you go back to great game theory, and the plan is to keep Russia out and Germany down. That was one of the themes of that era.
Yeah.
And you look at this Atlantic Declaration and how notable that Brazil, a member of BRICS, signs it. South Africa is excluded.
Yeah.
There's no sign of Germany. We have a very select group of countries. And I know this is a serious business because of the Lobito corridor and the large cash injection to Angola.
Yeah.
Angola is this country over here. It's the last blue one. I don't know if you can see my cursor.
Yeah.
So This fascinated me when I heard of the Lobito corridor and the discovery of oil in Namibia. It suddenly started to occur to me, okay, Machiavellian lens. This is a hypothetical scenario I am running to see if it is plausible. What lengths will people go to? So I look at this in terms of the Houthis and the Red Sea, right? United States could have done a lot more, a lot sooner. They,
Absolutely.
but they just weren't interested. So what if that actually suited them? Because they're not really dependent on the Red Sea. What if it suited them for Russia and Europe and China and India and the east coast of Africa, for them all to bleed out slowly, get them down? So at their weakest, you don't have to go in with so much of a fight. In the meantime, if you look at the east coast of Africa, wherever Russia is, tied up with jihad, it's an absolute nightmare. Angola is known in Africa euphemistically as a mosque-free country. How interesting it is that there are major developments, railroads, luxury residences, five-star resort plans for really the kind of wealth that is quite unbelievable if you look at the scale of it, and unprecedented. So then I was looking at what if they are doing the Sun Tzu appear weak when you are strong, very quietly offloading the Red Sea, dumping Europe because there's nothing in Europe anymore. It's just like a quaint tourist attraction. Really, they've got a new supply of oil. They're looking at Angola and Namibia, and there we have no jihadi problems. When we need minerals from the DRC, instead of having to go complicated way, we've got this Lobito corridor, which just quietly goes across very friendly countries to the port of Lobito, and then we are free and clear in the Atlantic. And so this Red Sea trade route becomes much less important to America and the Atlantic partners. And we look at new friends as well, like El Salvador. Very interesting because I know Russia and China have been hoarding gold and buying gold and stacking it up in the hope to create possibly a gold-backed currency. And we see now there's a great friendship between the United States and El Salvador. El Salvador has just revealed that it's got trillions of dollars worth of gold.
Yeah.
So that might be a future scenario, a future outcome where the United States no longer needs the old friends, shall we say. If we are looking at this Atlantic setup, especially if they can get Greenland, and that would be a lot of logistics, rare earth minerals, rare earth elements, and then they've got everybody else, and they could just restrict themselves to this wonderful little Atlantic zone and damn the rest. You let them like kill each other and do whatever while you get filthy rich. So this was a totally mind-blowing thing. Nobody heard about it. Nobody knew about it. It was done so silently, and it packs weight because Angola got a very large donation of cash. So while South Africa is struggling financially and very heavily dependent on Iranian sponsors, and I'm sure Qatari sponsors, and I don't see much of Russia here. Angola, the poorest country in the area, is now suddenly flush with cash, and there is building and there are things happening. Same with Namibia, although Namibia isn't part of it. So do you see how I'm seeing the whole trade route and alliance shifting to something that suits America and damn the rest of our allies?
Yeah, so I think this does pull out a number of those particular concerns and areas. I think this is an ideal scenario. The fact that North America and Canada, or you can push that up and it could be considered all one kind of big blob, has been chatted about with Greenland as well added. I think America would move to get rid of some of the countries that are in here. To be honest, America doesn't really have a use for Spain or Norway. Even the UK is deeply problematic. But when you look at it from a perspective of what does America need, I think if you look closely at the South and Central American countries, these are very much on the radar of the United States. And that might actually be one of the more positive things to come out of all of this, because the neglect that the United States has shown just really within a 2,000 kilometers of their own borders to the south, past Mexico, there is able opportunity for America to engage. And I think also when you really consider it, if America does want a source of oil, having a relationship with Mexico and Venezuela would be even cheaper than having an oil relationship with Canada, because of the cost of labor in the south versus the cost of labor in the north, and then just the environmental and distances to travel. Yes, I think what we're talking about here, if we zoom out of all of this, is what you're starting to discern and try to identify is what the new world order looks like in
Correct.
terms of the new relationships that are going to start to manifest. Can we get to this though without a global conflict? The big question. And I think what we're seeing is the potential for global conflict as these new alliances and or alignments are going to take place.
I agree. And the notable thing about this whole setup, if you look at Greenland, there is I'm not sure if you just say it, GIUK choke point where the Russians can't come through to the Atlantic. So they could cut off Russia over there. And then they could replace the Panama Canal with an overland route. I'm talking because a lot of these plans are made very long term. I
Mhm.
know Russia and China have planned incredibly long term, not for today or tomorrow or next year. They're thinking in terms of the next 100 years. And I think America has been doing the same. And they've looked around and they said, look, if we could get Greenland, which, by the way, is 98% of Denmark, and the Greenlanders aren't that keen on Denmark, we could actually get rid of the Panama Canal, and we would make a much shorter trip. We would have a much better route. We would have Arctic access, just while the Arctic is becoming sort of prime ground
Real
for
estate. Yeah.
resources. Yeah, let's not waste our time over here. Let us just slowly move our interests over there and leave them to it.
Yeah, so I think this does pull out a number of those particular concerns and areas. I think this is an ideal scenario. The fact that North America and Canada, or you can push that up and it could be considered all one kind of big blob, has been chatted about, with Greenland as well added. I think America would move to get rid of some of the countries that are in here. To be honest, America doesn't really have a use for Spain or Norway. Even the UK is deeply problematic. But when you look at it from a perspective of what does America need, I think if you look closely at the South and Central American countries, these are very much on the radar of the United States. And that might actually be one of the more positive things to come out of all of this, because the neglect that the United States has shown just really within a 2,000 kilometers of their own borders to the south, past Mexico, there is able opportunity for America to engage. And I think also when you really consider it, if America does want a source of oil, having a relationship with Mexico and Venezuela would be even cheaper than having an oil relationship with Canada, because of the cost of labor in the south versus the cost of labor in the north, and then just the environmental and distances to travel. Yes, I think what we're talking about here, if we zoom out of all of this, is what you're starting to discern and try to identify is what the new world order looks like in
Correct.
terms of the new relationships that are going to start to manifest. Can we get to this though without a global conflict? And I think what we're seeing is the potential for global conflict as these new alliances and or alignments are going to take place.
I agree. And the notable thing about this whole setup, if you look at Greenland, there is I'm not sure if you just say it, GIUK choke point where the Russians can't come through to the Atlantic. So they could cut off Russia over there. And then they could replace the Panama Canal with an overland route. I'm talking because a lot of these plans are made very long term. I know Russia and China have planned incredibly long term, not for today or tomorrow or next year. They're thinking in terms of the next 100 years. And I think America has been doing the same. And they've looked around and they said, look, if we could get Greenland, which, by the way, is 98% of Denmark, and the Greenlanders aren't that keen on Denmark, we could actually get rid of the Panama Canal, and we would make a much shorter trip. We would have a much better route. We would have Arctic access, just while the Arctic is becoming sort of prime ground for resources. Yeah, let's not waste our time over here. Let us just slowly move our interests over there and leave them to it.